All right, well, let's jump into Mark 14. Last week, we got through verse 9, and starting in Mark 14, verse 3, we read about Mary, the sister of Lazarus and Martha, how she took a very expensive vial bottle of perfume, 300 denarii according to the apostles. That's $36,000 to $45,000. And were they rich? Was it a family heirloom? Did they save it? Had they had it in the family for centuries and used it at someone's burial or a wedding? We don't know. It's just it was worth a lot of money. They could have sold it. Not the apostles. The woman could have sold it and got a lot of money, or apostles and given it to the poor. But that's where we ended right there. Now we're going to read Mark 14, 10 and, whoa, right there, 10 and 11, please.
Okay. Then Judas Iscariot, who was one of the 12, went off to the chief priests in order to betray him to them. They were glad when they heard this and promised to give him money, and he began seeking how to betray him at an opportune time.
So last week we talked about Mary pouring this perfume on him, and the apostles were indignant, but certainly Judas was the instigator because he's named by name, and he didn't care about the poor, but he used to pilfer, he was the treasurer and used to pilfer what was put into the treasury. So we ended there, and Mary did this wonderful deed. And now we're at this point where Bill said, you know, it could, we don't know for sure he said that, but maybe this, you know, he's so intent on money and on greed that maybe this is the thing that just put him over the top. And because right after this, he went out and met with the chief priests and figured out a way to betray Jesus. Now, I want to point this out. He's not betraying him right now. This is that comes a little bit later. But he went out to figure out how they're going to do it, figure out the details of what they would do. And so he's not betraying him right at the moment. See, I had one more thought here. I just want to point out, this isn't the final betrayal. This is Judas making arrangements. I'll get your hand in just a second, Bill. Judas making arrangements for the betrayal. Just so we have the chronology right, Judas is going to come back and join Jesus and the other 11 apostles, and he's going to eat the Passover, which Jesus turns into the Lord's Supper with them. So he's coming back, going to join them. And I'd like to say this after your comment. I'll say what I was going to say next, Bill. So,
I was just going to say that his betrayal also involves some financial incentive too.
Big time.
We know that there was money involved there. So, again, we don't know if that's why it triggered him at this time with this thing that Mary did. But yeah, driven by that greed, wasn't he?
In fact, 30 pieces of silver isn't enough to buy a field, because that when Judas threw the money back at the chief priests and the temple, I believe it was, they bought a potter's field with it, as it is written in the Old Testament would happen. Now, I saw your hand. Let me just say this, because I wanted to say it early on, that we're going to get back to Judas. I don't want to develop him too much right now, because we're going to read more about him. But I said that, so I'll let you speak now. But I'm not wanting to get too deep into him until we look at more information.
Okay. So it's evident here, the Holy Spirit, through Mark, tells us his purpose wasn't simply to confer with the chief priests, but to betray him. And secondly, the motivation was not Judas nor the rabbis or the chief priests' love for truth. It was one simple thing: money.
Money, yep, absolutely. So more detail on Judas in a little while later. But now we're going to go to our next reading, and I have 12 through 15, even though I said 12 through 16, and that was Bill Spawn, I believe. Mark 14, 12 through 15.
Through 15?
12 through 15,
Okay.
Yep, 12 through 15.
And on the first day of unleavened bread, when the Passover lamb was being sacrificed, his disciples said to him, "Where do you want us to go and prepare for you to eat the Passover?" And he sent 2 of his disciples and said to them, "Go into the city, and a man will meet you carrying a pitcher of water. Follow him. And whenever he enters, or wherever he enters, say to the owner of the house, 'The teacher says, where is my guest room in which I may eat the Passover with my disciples?' And he himself will show you a large upper room furnished and ready, and prepare for us there."
So this is a little subtle, but I just want to point out a couple of things. Where should we eat the Passover? That was all Jews were required by God to observe the Passover. It was a continual thing until the new covenant. But notice this. Never really picked up on it until I just started looking at it in detail again. Jesus, they ask him where, and he says, "Go into the city and a man will meet you." And so I read one guy that said, yeah, so normally women carried the water, and I don't know if that's true or not, because in Jacob's day, there were shepherds at the well that would roll away the rock, and they were male, but Rebecca, so I don't know if that's true or not. But the thing is this, he said, normally since it's females carrying the water, be easy to recognize, and I think that's wrong. I mean, let me rephrase that. It's immaterial. Jesus didn't tell the disciples who were going, there were 2 of them. He didn't say, "You're going to find someone." He didn't say that. I looked up the word in the Greek. He says, "A man will meet you. A man will meet them." You follow me? It's not a huge doctrinal issue, but they didn't have to find the person. It said the person's going to find you. I thought that was interesting because I never picked up on that before. He'll be carrying a pitcher of water, but he's not the guy they're going to ask. He's not the guy that they're going to say, "Hey, do you have a room for us?" They're to follow him till they get to the house. They're going to ask the homeowners, "This man carrying the water, probably a servant. He's not the homeowner." And they are to ask the homeowner, verse 14, "Say to the owner of the house," the teacher says, "Where is my guest room?" Small. More important because of Bible skills, just digging out detail and using it than it is about major repercussion. But the one thing that may be significant is this. Here are these disciples. They believe that Jesus is the Christ, right? They do. Peter's already confessed him as the Christ earlier in the book of Mark. But they have their doubts at times, as they will when Jesus is crucified. So this is just one more proof when they think back on their walk with Jesus that, he told us this guy's going to come to us. He's going to meet us. And so it happened. Michael.
So here's a perfect example of providence.
Amen.
So, some might say, well, look at this miraculous thing. He went into the city and he met a man just like Jesus said. No, it's providence.
Yes.
And we don't know specifically how this man knew to meet them or how they, beyond what was described there, realized that it was that man, because there may very well have been more than one man carrying a pitcher. But this is
great example of
God
providence.
had something to do with it. We just don't know exactly.
And most likely they didn't know him. I'll get you in a second, since I started on the point. Most likely they didn't know him because he didn't say, "Go in there and meet Joseph of so-and-so." He said, "You're going to see a man." He didn't name him by name, so most likely they'd never seen him before, but still not a miracle, just an oppressive hand of God at work right here. And Mr. Don.
Just a piece of trivia there. I believe another gospel says that it was Peter and John that he sent.
Exactly. It's Luke 22, and I think about verse 11. He names the 2 disciples, Peter and John, Luke 22. I don't have it written down, but I'm pretty sure it's verse 11 right there. Good point. Okay, I didn't want to spend a lot of time on that. Oh, go ahead, please, Gary.
Jesus telling them to go follow the man with the pitcher of water reminds me of him telling them, go find the man with the colt. And also reminds me of Jesus telling them, go catch a fish. And that fish they caught was the fish that had the denarius in it. So Jesus, he knows what he's doing. It's all set up. This reminds me of those other passages.
Amen to that. And anyway, good stuff, had some value, probably even more to them because, just like Jesus, this is Jerusalem during the Passover, when there are at least hundreds of thousands more Jews than normal. We're supposed to find a guy. No, you're not supposed to find a guy. They knew Greek. There's a guy there that's going to meet you. So kind of cool. Did you have a hand up, Mike? Mike and then Bill.
Just that, with that point you just made, how that today when they have, say, for example, spring break down in some city in Florida, it just gets overrun, and so you can imagine that not everyone found a room in which to have the Passover. Perhaps they had it out in, I don't know, tent or something that they brought along. And so this was a concern to them. Where do you want us to go? Where are we going to have this? And perhaps, anyway, that was.
I read something and, I'm not going to go next. It's going to be Bill and then it's going to be Andrew.
Yeah, there's something here that's miraculous knowledge of some sort, or Jesus.
Well, yes, on Jesus' part, absolutely.
Or Jesus met him earlier in the month and arranged it. We don't know, but it could be. But the thing is that, or this guy was given a vision to prepare a room. Who was the room prepared for? It prepared for Jesus, very likely, because he had whatever.
They didn't say, hey, we're from out of town. They said, the teacher asks.
Yeah, they just doesn't explain.
How much more than that, we don't know. Did Jesus make prior arrangements? Don't know, but it was still impressive. Good point. Andrew.
I just wanted to comment on verse 12. It says, on the first day of unleavened bread, when the Passover lamb was being sacrificed. There's a definite time marker here for this week. I've heard a lot of people suggest that that day was actually the next day, that he was actually sacrificed in conjunction with the Passover lamb. But that's not what this says here. This says that they observed the Passover. It was an actual Passover meal, not the day before the actual Passover meal, but it was actually the day of the lamb being sacrificed.
So you forced my hand. And so I'm just not an Old Testament historical scholar. I try to read Edersheim when I can and some Josephus, but here's what I read by a pretty reliable source. He said that the Galileans and the Jews up north started their day at a different time than the Jews in Jerusalem and Judea. He said the Galileans said a new day began in the morning. And so a Thursday would go from Thursday morning to Friday morning, not midnight, but they started in the morning. Whereas the more Jews in the area of Jerusalem started their day in the evening. So, for instance, Friday night, as soon as it gets dark, is actually the Sabbath to many Jews, because a lot of them started in the evening. And so he goes through and he kind of makes this point about why the confusion and what day this began on and so forth, because they were from Galilee and they is that true? I'm just not enough of a Jewish historical scholar, but I am telling you that one person that's pretty good suggested this was the reason why. And one other thing too, on the dogs, by the way, I've gone back and looked and there's no doubt historically that Gentiles had pet dogs. We don't doubt that for a bit. I mean, that's documented. They found evidence of that. I can't remember if it's remains or if it's drawing, but Gentiles did have pet dogs. Jews, we have zero evidence in Jesus' day, but just confirming, that the Gentiles did. All right. I don't think we'll spend any more time there. Did you speak yet, or were you waiting to, Mike? No, you spoke, okay. The disciples went out, came to the city, and found it just as he had told them. How many disciples in verse 16? How many is that?
More than one.
Couldn't hear you?
More than one.
Oh, yes. It was more than one. But we know that it wasn't the 12. I read some of the stuff and I go, I don't spend a lot of time on single words. I go, the disciples, that must be 12, but it can't be the 12, but it has to be more than one. It's Peter and John, just like somebody pointed out in Luke 22, Jesus names the two apostles that he sent into town to make the preparations and to find the room. And the they is them. The disciples, the two that he sent to the town, went out and came to the city. It's Peter and James, only two. And another way we know is this. 17, when it was evening, he, Jesus, came with the 12. So two went in early, the rest came in later. Does that matter? Probably not at all, except just to see how to use Bible skills. Read the context, and the disciples cannot be all 12 in verse 16. Bill, and he's almost at you.
I'm just trying to put together the time thing here and why Andrew asked the question and why you made the comment about the day the Passover lamb was sacrificed, because isn't it the same day, though an evening, that they actually eat the supper, right?
I mean,
are they eating it tonight?
I read it a lot and I don't recall. I
Right,
don't know if it's the same day or the day. It must be the same day. He must have told them, I remember now thinking it was early morning, go to the city. I'm thinking it's the same day.
Okay, because, yeah, I guess you can't prove that, but because you don't know the time stamp here about when they actually went out, but it looks like the same day they're going to eat the Passover, which would make sense if it was sacrificed, they would eat it that day, right? No?
So that could have been, if it was the same day, the ones in Judea would say, hey, this is, anyway. Yeah, it's not easy, and a lot of people chew on this to figure out how it works. And I put a little time in and said, that's enough. That's enough. It'll take me way too much time to possibly get it right. No guarantees. Michael.
Well, the sacrifice of the lamb that's eaten in the Passover would then provide the blood that is applied to the the lintel and the doorposts, and it just wouldn't seem feasible that they would save this blood, for a day or whatever, or even the lamb. The whole point of the Passover was to do this in a attitude of some haste, because the angel is going to come and he's going to pass over that house based on the fact that the lamb, and they're going to be inside eating while that happens.
We're going to look at Exodus 12 actually, because I think that's important. It has some value for us today even. So good point, and I totally agree. So when it was evening, he came with the 12, and then the next reader, if the next reader would take, let's go 18 through 21, and that would be Andrew. Good, Gary, you're right on.
Now as they sat and ate, Jesus said, "Assuredly I say to you, one of you who eats with me will betray me." And they began to be sorrowful and say to him one by one, "Is it I?" And another said, "Is it I?" And he answered and said to them, "It is one of the 12 who dips with me in the dish. The Son of Man indeed goes just as is written of him, but woe to that man by whom the Son of Man is betrayed. It would be good for that man if he had never been born."
Wow. A couple of things we can notice here. It's pretty clear. I love the humility of the disciples. They're asking, they were grieved, heavily grieved. The Messiah, our friend, is going to be betrayed. It's not me, is it? And I think it's really clear that no one knows who it was, even by Jesus' response. Is it me? Or surely it's not me, is it? And he says, it's one who dips in the bowl with me. So he gives them a clue. How many were dipping in the bowl with him? Well, John was, he could put his head in the chest or bosom of Jesus, so it could have been John. And we're told that Judas did somewhere. But they did not know who it was. They did not know who the betrayer was, and that's really important. There are a lot of people who worship God in insincerity. They go to a place until they find one where they like the preacher. Maybe they get to know him and see, this guy, he's genuine. He gives 15% of his salary to the poor, spends a lot of time with people, he's kind and funny. And the disciples, I lived with about 36 guys when I was in a military college for 2 years, and we're under great stress. And they force us to work as a team. Physical stress, mental stress, far harder than most colleges. They give us a lot more hard. And you're being, for the first year, they just belittle you. And the only way you're going to even meet the commands of the upperclassmen is if you work as a team and help each other. And so it was amazing to me because I got to know most of the 36 better than my own brothers. The apostles, they spent 3.5 years or so with Judas, living under the stars and sometimes going hungry and a lot of physical duress and mocking. And they knew each other. How many people knew it was Judas? None. You can't just look at a man and because of his personality or his intelligence or how nice he is, you can't tell. Maybe sometimes, I agree. If they're really, if a person, man or woman, is just rebelling against the Word of God, well, that's obvious. But Judas knew how to play the game. He fooled everybody. He knew how to pray. He was raised a Jew. Jesus chose him. And nobody knew it was Judas. And they had no way to know. Only Jesus knew. The thought here is that in our lives we have the same situation. All religious people do. We're told, test the spirits in 1 John 4:1. See whether from God, because many false teachers have gone out into the world. How do you test them? Not personality, not even knowledge necessarily, or how nice they are. There's only one way. We study the Word and we say, this guy's in total alignment with the Word. We disagree on a few minor things. What did Jesus mean by dog? Was it an insult or a compliment? I mean, so what? But this guy lines up, or this woman lines up with the Word, and I've put them to the test. And they passed it, and I trust them, and I'm blessed to be in the same congregation as them. Or they don't pass the test, but you can't go by feel, and even though you know that, and that's probably why your members here, there are so many people that make the wrong choice because they don't put the preacher to a biblical test, and that's the only way you can know. There are a lot of people who know how to play the game, and I'm telling you what you already know, but I'm going to say it anyway. A lot of people who know how to play the religious game, and they fool lots of people, and that's why Jesus says there's many false prophets. They're good at what they do. Only one way, test them against the Word of God. Andrew.
I think another lesson is that, like in verse 19, where they began to be grieved and say to him one by one, surely not I, as you pointed out, they didn't even know if they themselves were going to do that.
Amen.
So not only do we have to look out for others and test them by the word and stuff, we have to do the same thing for ourselves. 1 Corinthians chapter 11 says to examine yourself, especially, when you're taking the Lord's Supper, but we have to weigh ourselves against Jesus Christ and that. And Jesus said, whoever confesses me before men, I will confess before my Father in heaven. But he also says, he who denies me before men, I will deny before my Father in heaven. So we've got that dynamic. I mean, you have to make, and the point I want to make is you have to make the decision ahead of time whether you're going to confess Jesus or not. And these guys, they still weren't sure, I think. Otherwise, they would say, like Peter, I am willing to die for you, right? He still ran away, but he didn't betray Jesus in that way, in the same way that Judas did.
In fact, I can't remember which gospel it in. It may be in Mark, but they all said the same thing. Peter said, I'll die for you. And in one of the gospels, at least, it said they all said the same thing. I'll die for you too. And so they had their ups and downs, because Peter says something like, we gave up everything. We gave it all up to follow you. And so they were committed, but they had their ups and downs, their moments of doubt and their moments of faith and that kind of thing. Michael.
And in Matthew, and maybe I'm reading too much into this, but Matthew 26, verses 20 through 25, roughly, is where we're paralleling. Jesus, in verse 21 says, and as they were eating, he said, truly I say to you that one of you will betray me. 22, being deeply grieved, they each one began to say to him, surely not I, Lord. So it seems like there's this kind of a roll call going on with each one, not I. But what I notice here is that there's one who kind of lingers and doesn't seem to be as eager to give his response, and that's down in verse 25.
Right up on the board.
And Judas, right, go ahead. And Judas, who was betraying him, said, surely it is not I, Rabbi. Jesus said to him, you have said it yourself. So Judas seems to be kind of holding back a little bit, or then he realizes he needs to chime in also.
And that possibly could be right. I mean, I don't think we can know. Sometimes the Bible, we don't get this, and there was a 2-minute delay, or he said, we don't know. It just said he was one of the ones. He also said, you may be totally right. Either way, Jesus kept it cryptic enough. Surely it's not I. You said it yourself. Well, that could be taken one or two ways. You're right. It isn't you. Or, yeah, you said it, and it is you. So would I have got it? I'm sure I wouldn't have. Were there hints? Probably. But it is interesting that Jesus calls him on it, and at least Judas understood what Jesus was saying to him. Yes, Lee, in just a second, he'll be right with you.
We have both the advantage and disadvantage of knowing what was going to happen and why it was going to happen. These disciples didn't know what was going to happen, how the betrayal was going to take place.
Yeah.
Somebody could have come up to one of them and said, show me to the master. And by having a few people following that guy around, they could have all ganged up on him, and that could have been the betrayal.
Yeah.
It could have been purely by accident, no thinking about it in advance. We don't think about that possibility, but I'm sure the disciples were thinking about things
Good
like
point.
that. Could I possibly slip up and in some way betray him to these Pharisees? That it probably wasn't thinking in their minds, this is going to be an intentional betrayal. We know that it was, and so we always think of them thinking of it that way, but it may not have been.
Yeah, that's a good catch. That's a good catch. I mean, he caught them off guard so many times, and the way it played out took him totally by surprise. So appreciate that thought right there. In John 6:64, Jesus is speaking and he says, "But there are some of you who do not believe." For Jesus knew from the beginning who they were who did not believe and who it was that would betray him. So, throwing it out, majority or all of you know that, but Jesus knew ahead of time, but the disciples did not. Verse 70 in the same chapter, Jesus answered them, Did I myself not choose you, the 12, and yet one of you is a devil? Now he meant Judas, the son of Simon Iscariot, for he, one of the 12, was going to betray him. So God knew, Jesus knew, the disciples didn't. Yeah, so I think we'll move on from there unless there's some thoughts. Bill Spawn, please. Lots of meat here, right?
I have no idea, but you mentioned 3.5 years together, going around performing miracles. Now, it's possible Judas never performed a miracle. Hard for me to believe if he didn't believe that he could perform a miracle. It's just hard to know, but a question's been asked before, has been said before, that someone I knew a long time ago, Judas wasn't convinced by the miracles, why should I be? So, and yet obviously the other 11, were thoroughly convinced. And so the only answer I could come up with was the fact that God gives us the evidence we need. Some accept it, the reality of it, and some of it reject it for whatever reason. But I just, it's kind of interesting that he didn't believe after being with Jesus in person 3.5 years.
And here's just a thought, because this troubles us all, right? How could Judas do this? Is it possible that Judas did believe? He hung himself. Remorse. Is it possible Judas did believe, but maybe he thought something like this? Whew. I've seen Jesus escape. There's other times where they wanted to stone him, and they can't hurt him. I'll make my 30 pieces of silver, which is worth several thousand a day. I'll make my money. They're not going to hurt Jesus because they can't touch him. It's just an option. I don't know. We're never told that depth, but maybe he did believe and just said, I'll do it because no harm will be done. So I had two hands. I think it was Andrew and then Don, so that's the order we'll take it.
Yeah, that's one theory, and the other theory is that Jesus, that he was forcing Jesus to declare himself as the Messiah, and I don't buy either one of those theories, because he was a thief, and he was interested in money, and sometimes our baser instincts override our belief, right? All of us believe, right? But there are those of us who will fall away. And is it because we never believed in the first place? No, it's because other things draw us away. There are our lusts and our desires and stuff. And Judas obviously had those because, if he had gotten the money from the alabaster flask and the perfume, he would have taken it, right? And so I fully believe that he believed, yes. But there were things in his life that drew him more to the dark side, if you will, that he really was a thief.
Well said. That's a great one. We all have our ups and downs, and what about this fact? This is speculation, but sometimes it helps sharpen the mind. We're not trying to say this is the only option, but did Judas do any miracles? Well, we have false prophets. We have evil people that prophesied. The real prophecy, we have Caiaphas, we have King Saul, he prophesied. Balaam was an evil man, and they spoke for God. Is it possible that Judas did some miracles? Wouldn't it stand out if he didn't? The 12 come back, yeah, man, kicking him out. Judas, did you do anything? I didn't. And look, I don't know the answer. I don't know the answer, and we never will till we get to heaven. But it's okay, I think, to speculate to a point and say, what are some of the possibilities? Was there a hand? Yeah, there is.
We have accounts of what do we call them? Near disciples, individuals that Jesus said, "Come, follow me," and they said, "Oh, let me go bury my father first," or the one that said, I forget the other particular circumstance. So here so what I was getting at is Judas must have met some standard of acceptance, because not just everybody was given the opportunity to be a disciple. Roger Eccles did an excellent lesson on discipleship, how that, it required a certain stage of learning and skill for one to be encouraged to become a disciple. Of course, we know Jesus spontaneously called people to respond rather spontaneously. But anyway, that's what I'm getting at. Is
Jesus had, I'm sorry.
No, that's fine.
Jesus had to choose Judas. He knew it from the beginning who was going to betray him. He said, "Didn't I choose the devil among you?" And I didn't read him tonight. But there's, is it Psalms or Zechariah 13? But one of them prophesies about Judas, and it says that one will lift up his heel against me. Where is that?
It's a friend who lifts up his heel against. Right.
Yes. And so this was to fulfill prophecy. It wasn't an accident. What did I do by choosing Judas? It was intentional. And I think it's clear from the context, Judas did not stick out. There's no indication anybody suspected him above the rest. Don, I'm sorry to skip you.
I believe that's Psalm 41 that says, even he who eats my bread lifts up his heel
That's
against me."
exactly what it says.
I believe that's Psalm 41.
I believe you're right.
But anyway, what I was going to say is, I think Andrew was getting to the point that I was going to make about Judas. Some people say that what Judas had in mind was that he as most everybody else at the time did, thought that Jesus was going to, take over and become king, and the earthly kingdom type thing. And so a lot of people say it's a theory that Judas was trying to, like Andrew said, force Jesus to take over, like force his hand and say, "Okay, I've been betrayed by the Roman government. Now I'm going to become king," But it was just Judas's misinterpretation of what was going to happen, as most everybody else, all of his disciples, because they asked him even when he was about to ascend, is the kingdom going to be set up now?
Right.
They were looking for an earthly kingdom. So anyway, that's a theory that I've heard that a lot of people think about Judas, was that he was just misguided, but in order to fulfill the scripture, he had to betray Jesus.
Another possibility, right? Definitely so. Moving to verse 22. Good stuff. While they were eating, now they're partaking of the Passover meal that Jesus is going to change into something superior, something that the Passover meal was only a symbol of. He's going to institute the Lord's Supper, but that's what's happening. So he said, while they were eating, he took some bread, and not to bless it, and he broke it and gave it to them. And he said, "Take it. This is my body." Before we move on, we're gonna look at Exodus a little bit, but what do we know about the bread? What do we know about the bread? One more time. It was unleavened. And we know that because in Exodus, there's several passages. I think it's worthwhile to look at them. Exodus 12:15, 7 days, God is speaking to Moses. 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread, but on the first day you shall remove leaven from your houses. For whoever eats anything leavened from the first day until the seventh day, that person shall be cut off from Israel. Big stuff. Just like sin can cut a person from God, off from God. You eat leaven during these 7 days, but cut off from Israel. really important. So they shall not eat any unleavened bread for 7 days. 18 of the same chapter, in the first month, on the 14th day of the month at evening, you shall eat unleavened bread until the 21st day of the month at evening. And you say, well, evening, I thought you were talking about morning. In the beginning, from what I've read, I'm just not a good enough historian, but they said that there is a difference between the Passover and the Feast of the Unleavened Bread, but they're so similar that they just kind of blend them together and spoke of them as one. And is that true? I don't know, but I'm just letting you know. That's what some people say. Moving on, though, they went from the 14th day of the month at evening until the 21st day of the month at evening, no leaven. And it says even more. Verse 19, 7 days there should be found, 7 days there should be no leaven found in your houses. For whoever eats what is leavened, that person shall be cut off from the congregation of Israel, whether he is an alien or a native. And so they weren't even to have it in their house. No yeast at all. And so I would just ask you this. It says, whoever eats what is leavened. Did they use leaven? Was leaven used for any other type of food than bread?
Yeah, well, yeast is used in the fermentation of beer
So to make wine,
and of wine.
if it's
yeah.
alcoholic wine, then it was made with leaven.
Right.
The leaven, the yeast work on the sugar, turn it into alcohol. When it gets strong enough, the yeast die, but alcoholic wine is made with leaven, and they weren't to eat anything that's leavened. So in my mind, it seems clear that during the Lord's Supper, they had the fruit of the vine, non-alcoholic grape juice, not alcoholic as some places use. And Lee, Gary's got a little ways to go. But nothing, don't eat anything that is leavened.
Exodus 12, verse 8, talking about the eating of the Passover itself. They shall eat the flesh that same night, roasted with fire. They shall eat it with unleavened bread and bitter herbs. So eating the Passover was required to be eaten with unleavened bread.
Yes. It was, in fact, there were 4 ingredients. Let me just finish asking the question, Andrew, and you can answer it if that's what you're going to do. But there were 4 things they had to eat during the Passover meal. Were you going to answer that one or something else? I can. Good. Gary's almost to you.
Well, I mean, I can name 3 of them, right? I mean, well, actually, it was the lamb and the bitter herbs and the unleavened bread. It doesn't actually mention the drink.
You're right.
In Exodus.
And in Exodus it does not.
Right. But that wasn't why I raised my hand.
Good. You had one more thing though?
No. Well, the logistics of unleavened grape juice at this time of year intrigues me because it's about 3 to 5 months early for grape juice. You're at the tail end of the season because it's basically the beginning of spring. You don't get grapes and you don't get a harvest until later, like fall.
Right.
So they've had to preserve this grape juice in a way that's not alcoholic if indeed they have to have non-alcoholic grape juice.
And they were able to do that. There's a book called, I think it's called Bible Wines. Maybe it has a longer name than that, but called Bible Wines. What I like about it is it's well documented. When he makes a statement, and he's not infallible, but when he makes a statement, he says, we got it from this book and the Mishnah and this book, and he names the sources. And he said that the Jews had developed a way to preserve grape juice and not being alcoholic. He said they had that way, and he documents that. Again, I'm not a historian, but seems pretty credible, and you have the right, the ability to study that out as well. Okay, didn't finish all our points on this, but it's a good place to stop because it is 8 or 8:01. So thank you again. The Lord be with you. We'll see you on Sunday, Lord willing.